I married you, but all this time I wanted your sister. Can you imagine? He said this to my face, without a hint of shame. But he had no idea what was waiting for him after those words. Before we continue, please write which country you are watching this video from and how old you are. Enjoy listening. Late autumn light streamed through the blinds and fell in golden streaks on the frame with the wedding photo on the nightstand. In it, Roma and I are young and radiant, and he is holding me by the waist as if he will never let go. That evening, vegetable soup simmered on the stove. Familiar, simple, homemade. Sometimes that's what lifts a person's spirits when they come home tired and gloomy. I am Emily Carter, 32, a school librarian at our 17th elementary school. My job is quiet but lively, with children's hands, book pages, and the joy of seeing one of the kids tackle a real thick book for the first time. I am one of those women who notices small things, like how a person's voice changes when they are depressed, how to place a mug so that there are no wet marks left on the table, how to arrange small things around the house so that the apartment stays warm, not just from the radiator. I stirred the soup with a wooden spoon, tasting it for salt, and brushed a strand of hair from my cheek. My hair always tries to escape from behind my headband. I wanted Michael to come in, take a breath, smile, and say his usual "let's live." Lately, he rarely said that. The door clicked, and his confident footsteps echoed down the hallway. As always, he turned off the sound on his phone, mechanically straightened his shoulders, and took off his tie. He had a sharp nose, a stubborn chin, dark hair combed back, a handsome man. No doubt about it. And yet there was something closed, alien in his face. "Is that your signature soup smelling so good?" he asked, seemingly cheerfully, but his eyes avoided mine, looking past me. "It is," I replied and tried to smile without straining. "I thought you might need something warm today." Michael nodded, poured himself some water, and took a couple of big gulps. Recently, this had become the norm for us. He was distracted and taciturn, and I was picking up the house like scattered toys. I tried to reach him with something simple and understandable. "Jessica didn't call?" he asked as he walked to the table. "She called and perked up. She finally moved to our city. Can you imagine, after all these years, she just came. Her apartment is 15 minutes from here. She invited us over for dinner on the weekend to show us her place." "Yeah," he said, looking at his phone. He flicked through the feed with his finger as if the fate of the country was being decided there. I poured the soup into deep bowls. I put bread, garlic, and herbs on the table. Michael sat down, broke off a piece, nodded, and quickly ate a couple of spoonfuls, seemingly without noticing the aroma or taste. I told him about our third grader who had finally finished reading his first adult novel and proudly brought the book back to return it, as if it were a medal. And about the kids from First B, for whom I had picked out pictures today to go with a story about a fox. Michael listened, nodded in the right places, interjected with "aha" and "I see," but his gaze kept wandering off somewhere. "How are you?" I asked when it got really quiet. "At work?" "Fine," he replied briefly. "Client Petrov, deadline is pressing." "I understand." My neighbor, Linda, shared her experience over tea this morning. Men sometimes withdraw into themselves during such periods. Give them space, but don't let them go completely, keep a hold on them. Diana has been married for 20 years, she knows what she's talking about. I nodded, took note, but it didn't bring any relief. Someone else's advice is just that until you figure out where to go yourself. We washed the dishes almost in silence, me with a sponge, him with a towel. Then Michael went back to the living room with his phone, said it was work, and turned on silent mode. Lately, he had been having these kinds of conversations often, late at night, cautiously, as if someone were sleeping nearby and he didn't want to disturb them. I lingered in the kitchen, wiped the table, checked to see if the balcony was closed. On the nightstand, I stopped again at our photo. I'm laughing genuinely in it, my head on his shoulder. And he looks at the camera confidently, as if with a hint of possessiveness, which I liked at the time. My parents, who are retired in Miami, admired him from the very first day. He's a good, serious guy, Emily, he'll take care of you. My dad whispered in the courthouse as he walked me up to him. Your happiness is in good hands. And my heart was singing then. Now there was no singing. There was something steady, quiet, something wrong. It didn't scream or stab, but seemed to pull from within with a thin thread that sews invisible seams. I lay down, listened, his voice whispered in the hall, yes, yes, later, we'll talk on the phone. Work, I told myself, and turned to the wall, trying not to count the minutes. Michael came in late, didn't turn on the light in the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, took off his watch. He didn't smell like the office, but something fresh, unfamiliar, as if he had walked through someone else's hallway and brushed someone's scarf with his shoulder. He lay down on the edge and turned away. I lay with my eyes open and thought that every marriage has periods of silence, somewhere the storm has passed, somewhere it is just gathering. The main thing is not to create a storm yourself. But somewhere deep down, below reason, a whisper rose, shifted. And it won't go back on its own. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe evenly. Tomorrow I'll call Sveta, confirm Saturday, buy a cake, ask if she has a teapot at her house, she always forgets about that. And everything will be as it should be, a simple dinner, conversation, laughter. And then, maybe something will work out between Roma and me, as long as we don't drag it out too long. With these thoughts, I fell asleep, as happens when you're tired not physically, but mentally. All day long I kept up the house, my work, myself, and someone else's silence, and then I just shut down. And yet, along with sleep, one sticky thought crept into my head, like a drop of syrup. What if it's not about me, and not about fatigue, but about something where neither soup nor patience can help anymore? Saturday crept up quickly, as it does when you try to put off a conversation and hope that everything will somehow work itself out. In the morning, I finished the macrame panel for Sveta that I had been weaving in the evenings, my hands busy, my head quiet. I wrapped it in paper and took a good bottle of wine out of the cupboard, which Michael himself had suggested I take. He was unusually lively from the morning, making jokes, fixing a strand of hair in the mirror in the hallway, asking how far it was to his sister's apartment. Even though we had already discussed that it was a 15-minute walk from us. Jessica opened the door right away. As soon as we rang the doorbell, she was warm, quick, her eyes shining. She rushed to hug me, took the bags from Roma and, as it seemed to me, held his hand on her shoulders a moment longer than necessary. Although, maybe I was already looking for something extra. Her apartment is new, bright, not yet fully furnished, but already cozy in its details. A blanket on the sofa, matching cups, magnets from her travels on the refrigerator. I looked at everything, sincerely happy for her. Like an older sister is happy for her younger sister when she finally becomes closer. We sat down at the table. Jessica, as always, served her signature lasagna, which smelled of tomatoes and cheese. The wine was good, and the conversation flowed easily at first, about work, about neighbors, about how convenient it is to live nearby and drop in for tea just because. And suddenly I noticed that Michael had come alive again, laughing out loud, jumping up to help, catching every bright word, asking how she liked her new office. What their design studio was working on, what exhibitions they were currently involved in, and even taking the dishes to the kitchen after dinner. Even though at home that's always my job. Do you remember our trip to Colorado last summer? Jessica said, pouring wine. We should do it again, but this time with Roma. That would be great, I replied, smiling, but somewhere below my chest I felt a chill. Michael wasn't looking at me, but at Svetlana's hands, thin and lively, as they cut the cake and explained where it would be best to hang my panel. I lingered in the bathroom for a minute. I wet my temples with cold water and glanced in the mirror. It seemed to be the same face, except for a wrinkle between my eyebrows that hadn't been there before. I told myself not to worry, you know Svetlana, she won't hurt you. When I came back, Michael and Jessica were standing close to the sink. Too close, it seemed to me. They caught themselves, stepped back, clattered with their mugs. Michael dug into his phone as diligently as if he were looking for instructions on how to breathe properly. The drive home was quiet. The car rolled along, the headlights licking the wet asphalt, the evening promising rain, and in the cabin there was that very silence that I had already learned to recognize. Not restful, but like a deafening wall. At home, we exchanged a few words. I took off my earrings, put them in a box, and finally spoke first, unable to hold back. Did you enjoy Svetlana's place? I said cautiously, buttoning up my robe. You were easygoing today. Jessica is a pleasant conversationalist, Michael replied without looking up. And her apartment is nice. And you hardly talked to me all week, I said, no longer smiling. My voice betrayed me, but I straightened up and breathed calmly. Don't start, OL, his face hardened. Tired. I'm not starting, I was choosing my words carefully so as not to hurt myself or him. I'm trying to understand what's going on with us. Nothing, he cut me off. Just a pleasant evening, that's all. Don't interrogate me. He took a pillow and went to the sofa. The sound of the refrigerator came from the kitchen, as if the house had also sighed and closed itself off. I lay there and listened to the silence, trying not to cry, because tears don't fix anything, they only blur the contours, but my chest felt wet. Then a new norm began. Michael started staying late at work, coming home late, smelling of his office and expensive perfume. He kept his phone with him and set a password, which we had never had before. A couple of times I saw him at the entrance, whispering when he noticed me. He immediately hung up the phone, and the smile on his face disappeared like a puddle underfoot. When Jessica invited us to an exhibition opening at the City Exhibition Hall on Thursday, he agreed immediately and somewhat too eagerly. As if he had been waiting for the invitation. At the opening, he hardly left the spotlight. They stood next to each painting, whispering and laughing. I saw him lean closer than necessary to examine the brushstrokes, even though everything was clear. I tried to act normal, talking to people and looking at the works. I praised one young artist for his boldness, but my eyes kept returning to where the two of them were, and this image made everything inside me tremble, as if in a draft. At night, when we both reached the bedroom, he threw his clothes into a pile, one after another. Silent as a soldier on the parade ground, I pulled off my wool tights, sighed, and, unable to bear it any longer, asked directly, without beating around the bush. Sometimes there's no other way. Do you have feelings for my sister? The question hung in the air like a wire, thin but sharp. He froze for a split second, his eyelashes fluttered, then he said no too evenly and too quickly. And that was enough to understand that I couldn't remain silent any longer, because the next pause would tear the fabric apart. The rain started in the evening, quiet and persistent, as if someone above had decided to wash the city clean and my thoughts along with it. I sat alone at the table, poking at my cutlet with a fork, listening to the clock ticking, and catching myself counting the drops on the window. Michael had written in the morning that he would be late. A meeting. The third one this week. I cleared my untouched plate and put the kettle on, just to have some kind of domestic sound besides the emptiness. There are small photo frames on the wall. We are on the embankment in Yalta, The wind is blowing, the sun is shining, I am laughing, holding his arm. We are at our friend's dacha, the same barbecue where we were introduced, and I waved goodbye, saying, "Meet him," and ran off to meet someone else. I seemed happy then, I had been chosen, people looked at me the way I had dreamed of my whole life. But now I looked closely and did not find the confidence that had warmed me all this time. His face showed not warmth, but politeness, which I had previously mistaken for tenderness. The lock clicked late. He came in wet, his hair plastered to his forehead, his shirt wrinkled, and the smell, not of the office, not of rain, but of expensive foreign perfume, which made my throat go dry. "Have you had dinner?" I asked calmly, without reproach, because reproach would get me nowhere. "I don't want to," he said, taking off his tie. "I don't have the strength." He went into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and slammed it shut sharply. I flinched at the sound, even though it wasn't loud. Then he sat down, buried his face in his phone, his fingers moving quickly, as if typing a message would save someone's life. "Rum," I said, and sat down opposite him so I wouldn't have to talk to his back. "We need to talk. Really talk." "There's nothing to talk about." "Oh, he didn't even look up. "Work, clients, Petrov is putting pressure on him. You'll understand when you get tired." You see, I kept my voice steady. Our house became so quiet that you could hear the kettle breathing. And every time Svetlana's name is mentioned, you become a different person. "I want to hear the truth." He covered his eyes as if from bright light, then got up, walked to the window, and leaned his palms on the tabletop. For a second, I thought he was going to say something sympathetic, but his face turned to stone and the words came out sharp. "You want the truth?" I wake up in the morning and feel trapped. Our marriage is as if it's not about me. I clung to the edge of the chair. Not because I was falling, but so I wouldn't start fluttering like a bird against the glass. "Is it because of her?" I asked quietly. "Because of my sister?" A second of silence, long as a corridor in the dark. Then he sat down, slumped his shoulders, and suddenly seemed to deflate, his voice becoming muffled. "I tried, Emily. Honestly. I thought I would get used to it, love it, understand it. But every time I see the light," he paused, swallowed, "I think I got the wrong door. I married you." He looked up. And there was no anger or pity in his eyes, only weary emptiness. "But I wanted your sister. I knew it would hurt. But I didn't know that pain could be as cold as the January air when it's scary to breathe." Inside, everything seemed to be compressed into one small, hard lump, and that made it even easier, not the sea, but ice. "How long?" I asked. "Since when?" "Since the beginning," he said, and looked away. "At that cottage." I approached her first. She laughed it off and walked away. "And you were kind, warm, you saw me." I thought, well, okay, here it is, the real thing. And I really tried. But he spread his arms. I lied to myself all the time. "Does Jessica know?" I asked, my tongue barely moving, like after a shot at the dentist. "No," he ran his hand over his face. "I never told her. And anyway," he realized that until she moved away, I was somehow holding on. And now, it's as if I've lost my mind. I wrapped my arms around myself as if I were cold, even though the apartment was warm. Little things started to come back to me. How he offered to bring good wine to Sveta's, how he came alive at her table, how he watched her hands. How he stood closer than necessary at the gallery. Everything fell into place, and this clarity didn't make it any easier, but it did make me calmer. At least now I understood the situation. "So," I said after a pause, "all this time I was fixing something that was broken from the very beginning. I didn't want to hurt you, Emily." He spread his arms as if apologizing. "I didn't admit it to myself. I thought we'd get through it, it would settle down. He hesitated. "I'm grateful to you for everything, But you don't love me, I finished for him. Truly. He nodded, and, strangely enough, I felt a little better, like when a doctor finally gives you a diagnosis that you already knew in your gut. I got up, poured some water, took a couple of sips, my palms trembling only slightly. I looked at him calmly, as I knew how to do with children in the library when I needed to restore order without shouting. Okay, I said. Let's do this. Today is guest room day. Tomorrow we'll decide how to move forward. I'm not going to hold on to nothing. I'm not a thing that was brought home by mistake. He nodded, said nothing, took the pillow, and left, trying not to look at me. The door to the guest room closed quietly, almost shyly. I stayed in the kitchen. The dishes were washed, the table was wiped, there was a black square in the window, and water streaked across the glass. I put my hand on the countertop and thought, I'm not a can of food with an expiration date on me. If they didn't want me, that's their problem. And almost immediately, another thought, clear and firm, I will tell the world the truth. Not for the sake of scandal, but for the sake of light. She and I are family. I hardly slept that night. I lay there listening to the rain rustling on the windowsill, and for the first time in a long time, in that rough darkness, I felt not only pain, but also a strange dignity that apparently lives in a person deeper than love. Towards morning, I dozed off for an hour, and when I woke up, I already knew what I would do first. Mike rolled over on the sofa in the guest room, and the springs creaked. I got up, turned on the kettle, and while the water was boiling, I dialed the first name on my phone list. My finger hovered over the green button. I pressed the green button, and on the first ring I heard Svetina's excited voice. "OL, what happened? You didn't sleep last night, I can tell." I said briefly, "Please come over." No explanations, because the words would just spill out anyway. Jessica was at the door in half an hour, wet from the drizzle, with a bag of pies so we could at least eat something. She hugged me tightly in the hallway, like when we were kids and I stood up for her in the schoolyard. I put the kettle on in the kitchen, we sat down, and I stammered out everything, word for word, how he said he married me but wanted you, how I pieced together the clues. How everything inside me turned cold and became clear. Jessica turned so pale that her freckles stood out more clearly. She put her hand on top of mine, her fingers warm and firm. OL said quietly, I never gave him a reason. At that cottage, he came up to me, I laughed it off and left. I had no idea that he had been like this all this time. I'm with you. Until the end. I nodded. Your words settled on my heart like a woolen blanket. In the evening, she spread the blanket on the sofa. I'll spend the night at your place. We'll figure it out tomorrow. And she stayed not for the sake of drama, but simply to be there, so that the house wouldn't echo with emptiness. For the first time in many days, I fell into a deep sleep without sinking into anxiety, breathing her steady breath from the room and realizing that I was not alone. We were awakened by voices, sharp and restrained. I went out into the living room in my bathrobe and saw Michael standing in the middle of the room, his face angry, his eyes darting around, and Jessica, thin and upright, looking at him in a way I hadn't been able to for a long time, firmly. You have to leave, she said calmly. Now. I live here, he snapped. And I need to talk to Olia. After what you did, Jessica didn't raise her voice, you've lost the right. He turned to me, putting on a look of pity, the very look that always made my shoulders slump. Olia, let's not get hysterical, we're adults. And that's exactly why, I said, we're not going to pretend nothing happened. The doorbell rang. On the doorstep stood Linda, our neighbor, in her jacket, unbuttoned, with worry in her eyes. Sorry, girls, I heard voices, everything's fine. We sat her down in the kitchen. We poured coffee, all three of us with trembling hands, but each hiding it in her own way. Linda paused, then said what she had been holding back for a long time. Emily, I saw Roma a couple of times with the saint at the store and at the bus stop. You were at work. I decided they were preparing some kind of surprise for you. I didn't want to get involved, I'm sorry. Svetlana's cheeks flushed. We bumped into each other by accident. I walked away every time. I nodded. Strangely enough, it didn't add to the pain, it just highlighted the picture. The picture became even clearer. When Linda left and Jessica went out onto the stairs, I called my mother. Michael was there again, his anger gone, replaced by his former gentleness. We need to talk about the future, he said in the same tone he had once used to persuade me to go to Yalta. I understood everything. I had been a fool. Emily, let's start over. I looked at him and suddenly felt neither hatred nor pity but emptiness. It was as if the hooks that held my faith in place had been removed. We have no future, Michael, I said calmly. Not anymore. He froze as if those words had struck him in the chest. He took a step, then changed his mind and lowered his arms. There was a quiet click in the hallway. Jessica had returned, and I already knew we couldn't go back. He opened his mouth to protest, and at that moment his phone beeped in his pocket. The phone beeped. Michael stared at the screen, his eyes skimming the lines, and everything in him closed again, like a cabinet door slammed shut with a palm. I need to step away, he said and walked into the hallway, speaking in a low voice. I couldn't make out the words, only the intonation, soft, unfamiliar. I stood at the table and realized that our conversation had ended like undercooked soup, taken off the heat, the flavor never quite coming together. The 3 weeks after that evening passed in a fog. Roma and I went our separate ways, to different rooms, on different routes, at different times of the day. At work, I moved like a machine, returning books, helping kids choose stories, smiling at parents at the door, and all of it was as if through glass. There were fewer of his things at home. Shirts disappeared. Men's shoes disappeared from the shelf. He rarely called, wrote briefly, as if they were memos. Jessica was there every day, either calling, dropping by with groceries, or just sitting in the kitchen, legs tucked under her, silently. We slowly got down to practical matters, bills, cards, who was registered for what, who to call, how not to forget anything. I went to a lawyer, a businesslike woman who didn't mince words. The marriage was short, there were no children, the process would be straightforward. We'll prepare the paperwork, don't delay. I nodded, signed where I was told to. One evening, late at night, I got a text from Roma saying he would pick up the rest tomorrow. I'll come by after you get off work. I read it and felt not pain, but weary relief. Like after a long wait in line, my turn had finally come. That same day, I rearranged a few things in the room. I took the wedding photos off the walls and hung up old graphic sheets that Michael had previously rejected as gloomy. Cups that I liked, simple ones with thin rims, appeared on the shelf. Small gestures brought my home back to me. The doorbell rang not after work tomorrow, but unexpectedly that same evening. I opened the door, and Michael was standing on the threshold, disheveled, pale, with red eyes, as if he hadn't slept or cried, it was hard to tell. We need to talk, he said from the doorway. Now. I stepped aside silently, letting him in. He walked into the room, looked around, noticed that the photos had disappeared from the walls, and for a second seemed to lose his balance. "Oh, he began, I've thought it over. I was wrong. I got carried away. What I felt for the saint wasn't love, but," he searched for the word, "obsession, fantasy. And you're real. I love you. I'm ready for anything, a psychologist, a confession, anything. Give me a chance." Once upon a time, I would have lived for those words. But now I listened, and inside I was calm. I took a step back to put some distance between us. Rom, I said evenly, it's too late. He reached for my hand. At that moment, the phone on the table started ringing, and the light came on. I picked it up. "OL, are you home?" "Listen," her voice trembled, "Michael came to see me today. He said he loved me, that he would leave you no matter what, she faltered, that we could be together. I said he was out of his mind and that it would never happen. He got angry. I was scared. I'm sorry I didn't call you right away, my hands wouldn't obey me." I looked at Roma. He understood what the conversation was about. His face twitched like a person who had been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "That's not true," he exhaled. "Emily, you misunderstood." "Get out," I said quietly. "Right now." "Let me explain," he snapped. "If you hadn't told her everything, we would have had a chance. We could have been happy, you know that." "Enough," I interrupted. "Our only mistake with the saint was letting you into our lives." He said something else, about fatigue, about weakness, about how all people make mistakes, but I stood there thinking that what I saw before me was not love, not even trouble, but a person who was used to extracting benefit for himself from other people's hearts. I opened the door. He left, turning around as if expecting pity, but I couldn't find it in myself. The door closed softly, without a slam. The apartment became very quiet. I leaned my back against the wall, closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I exhaled completely, so that my chest felt empty and light. Like a room after a thorough cleaning. The phone in my hand trembled again. A message from the lawyer: "The documents are ready. We can file them tomorrow. Confirm the time." I typed my reply and stopped at the second digit because in the silence I suddenly heard the lock click clearly downstairs on the landing, followed by someone's footsteps on the stairs. Quick and decisive, I threw open the door to the landing. Svetlana was standing on the steps, pale, her fingers clenched at her throat, adjusting her scarf. "I couldn't stand it at home," I exhaled. "How are you?" "It's quiet inside," I said. "Come in." We sat down in the kitchen. Jessica silently poured me some water, but didn't do the same for herself. I briefly recounted her call, how Michael had tried to persuade me, how I had thrown him out. Jessica listened and shook her head. "He's sick with his fantasies, OL. But you're great. Let's stick together." She stayed until dark, then left, not because she was in a hurry, but because for the first time in a long time, I said confidently that I could handle it myself. And indeed, there was a different kind of silence in the apartment, not emptiness, but calm air that you could breathe. In the morning, I confirmed the time with the lawyer. She was brief, businesslike, no sugarcoating. "The package is ready, we'll file it today." The marriage was short, no children, the procedure is simple. "But we won't drag it out." I signed the papers. And each signature sounded like a click somewhere inside me. We're fixing it, closing it, moving on. A day later, Linda came in, knocked quietly, and from the doorway handed me a form with lasagna. "You've lost weight, you need to eat at least a little." She sat on the edge of the chair, patted me on the shoulder, and as she left, she repeated, "You're not alone. If anything, knock." I wandered around the apartment and listened to myself. I took our wedding album off the wall, leather cover, a wreath of dried flowers under the film. I opened it to the first page. "We are in the courthouse, he is looking at me." Before, it seemed to me that he was looking at me with adoration. Now I saw something else, propriety, polite warmth, behind which I wanted to see a flame. I leafed through the pages and felt the old picture of the past being rewritten, not torn apart, no, but becoming different, honest. At school, I kept my composure as usual, returned the books, helped a group of first graders find a story about a wolf, but a kind one, and smiled at the mothers at the door. After class, the principal called me over gently and said, "Olga, take a week off. You look tired." I nodded and said I would. I walked home slowly, pulling up my collar against the wind, and it seemed that for the first time in a long time, the city did not sound like a foreign hum, but simply like the wind, without any subtext. In the evening, my phone flashed. An unknown number. I know you think I'm a jerk. Someday you'll understand why. I wasn't shocked, I didn't feel hot, it was just as if something clicked inside me. I deleted the message, took a shower, and washed my hair. I put on my favorite warm dress and, for the first time in weeks, applied mascara. I sat on the edge of the bed and realized that I didn't want excuses or revenge. I need my voice so that it can be heard again. I took out the card that the school psychologist had given me. District Center, Family, Group on Thursdays. Today was Thursday. I went. The hallway smelled of paint and pharmacy mint. Women entered the hall in small groups, some in pairs, some alone, many with tired but steady eyes. Inside was a circle of chairs with a box of paper tissues in the center. I chose a chair by the wall, waited for everyone to sit down, and stared at my palms for a long time, dry, with a thread from macrame on the pad of my thumb. The leader nodded to whoever wanted to start. I listened to other people's stories and suddenly realized that mine was not about loss, but about return. When it was my turn, my heart beat once, loudly, like a hammer on a bell. I looked up. My name is Emily. I said it and felt my voice find its footing. The hardest thing was not losing my husband, but losing myself. But I think I've found a place to start. The woman across from me, around 70 years old, with kind, stern eyes, reached across the circle and placed her hand on mine. His choice is his. Your value is yours. Don't confuse the two. These words settled like pebbles at the foundation. I rode home without numbness, in the subway, among people, with the feeling that ahead of me was not a desert, but a road. The apartment greeted me with familiar silence, only it was different, like after airing out. I set a reminder on my phone. Thursday, group. I sat down by the window, finished my cold tea, and suddenly smiled, not at anyone, but at myself. The screen flashed again. One short message from Sveta. I'm proud of you. I replied with an emoji, which was rare for me, and closed my eyes for a minute. When I opened them, the phone flashed again. A letter from the lawyer, the hearing was scheduled. The deadlines were short. And then a pop-up calendar window appeared. A meeting at the center in 3 months. The autumn cycle would be over. I looked at the date, at the numbers, and said quietly, let's see who I'll be then. The next day, I was getting ready for work, hung up a new scarf, turned off the light in the hallway, and at that moment, there was a soft knock on the door. I thought it was the mail. Linda? But when I looked through the peephole, I saw. I opened the door slightly, and there was a courier in the peephole, holding an envelope for signature. A court notice, the date was set, the package was accepted. I signed, closed the door, and stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the ticking of the clock taking me away from the past. The next day, my lawyer and I filed everything. The wheels started turning without further ado. 3 months passed. Autumn squeezed its colors to a crisp, and leaves rustled underfoot in the park. I sat on a bench opposite the playground. The kids clung to the horizontal bars, squealing with joy, and I felt warm inside, quietly, without fanfare. It just became possible to breathe without effort. I only heard about Roma through mutual acquaintances. He had moved to Chicago and found a new job. Distance really does heal, it seems, but not on its own, only in combination with hard work and not allowing myself to become bitter. My phone flashed coffee after the group. I have news, Jessica wrote. I smiled and sent yes. Over the past few months, the Thursday group had become a source of support. I didn't go there for pity, but for an unbiased perspective. Today was the 11th meeting. The family home smelled of paint and mint, as usual. We sat in a circle, and when it was my turn, I spoke not about pain, but about the journey. The hardest thing, I said, was not losing a person, but stopping confusing my own worth with their choices. The women nodded as if we had all needed to hear this out loud for a long time. The coffee shop was warm and noisy. I saw light in our corner spot. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes were shining, and the good news was visible even before she spoke. We hugged, ordered, and as soon as the mugs were set down, she blurted out, "I'm being taken on in Boston. A big studio, a strong team. It starts after the holidays." I was genuinely happy for her, but still felt a twinge of pain somewhere below my ribs, knowing I would have to learn to live completely alone. "You're bursting with pride," I said, squeezing her fingers. "Go. I'll be fine." The coffee shop door swung open, a wave of cold air rushed into the room, and with it came him. Mike. He had lost weight and there were shadows under his eyes. His gait was unsteady, not the confident one I remembered. He looked around, like a stranger in a strange city, and suddenly saw us. His gaze caught and didn't let go. "I thought he was in Chicago," Jessica whispered, her face immediately darkening. "I thought so too," I replied, feeling my heart skip a beat. But it wasn't because of past pain, but as a warning. "Be calm." He paused at the bar, then moved toward us, one step, then another. Jessica tensed, her chin raised, ready to rebuff any foolishness. I sat up straight, my palms on my mug, the heat pressing against my skin and preventing my tremors from showing. Michael stopped at our table. He sighed, his lips trembled, his voice broke into a rasp, "Emily." He stood in front of us, holding our gaze, as if searching my eyes for an old door to a comfortable life. "Emily," he exhaled, "I understand everything. I was blind. What I had in my head with the saint was not love, but a fantasy that I myself believed in. The real thing was right there, with me. I lost it. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to tell the truth. For once, without lies." I listened calmly, like a doctor who already knows the test results. Jessica, sitting opposite, shook her head slightly, "Don't be fooled." But I had nothing to be fooled by. Inside there was a quiet but firm silence. "Thank you for telling me," I replied. "Take care, Michael." He nodded, as if he had received final permission, and left, disappearing into the February grayness behind the coffee shop window. We finished our coffee in holy silence. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and was surprised at how true it was. Even better than I thought. That evening, I walked home and for the first time felt not emptiness but air. At home, I turned on the table lamp, put on a record I had been saving for later, took my 2 favorite thin-rimmed cups out of the box, and left them as they were. Without consulting him, I took the last wedding photo off the wall, wiped the glass, and put the album away on a distant shelf. It wasn't an act of anger, just ordinary cleaning, wiping away the dust to make it easier to breathe. At night, I opened the window wide, the frost tightened and the air began to ring. I remembered the words of the older woman from the group, his choice about him. "Your value is about you," and I realized that they had settled inside me like a foundation. Quietly, without slogans, just holding the house together. The days flowed by, busy and calm. I went to the Thursday meetings, where I listened more than I spoke, and once I caught myself supporting a very young woman with my gaze. She was just starting out, her fingers crumpling her handkerchief, her eyes darting around. We left together after the circle, and she asked, "Is it true that it lets go?" I said, "Not me." Slowly. "But it is letting go." And I heard in my voice the confidence that I myself had recently lacked. Jessica was going to Boston. We sorted through her things, laughed at old t-shirts, cried over childhood photos, and it was all kind without drama. On the last evening before her train, we stood in the kitchen and ate sandwiches right over the sink, like we did in college. "Are you sure you won't fall apart without me here?" she asked, pressing her forehead against my shoulder. "I'm sure," I replied. "I know where my floor is now." We hugged tightly, not letting go until her phone rang and the taxi arrived. On the stairs, I waved to her, as I once waved to her in first grade. The door closed. The house became completely silent for a second, and then immediately filled with the usual sounds again. Water gurgled in the radiator, the clock ticked, the kettle whistled before boiling. I set the table for one, without ceremony, just dinner. I sat down, tasted the soup, and suddenly realized that being alone does not mean being lonely. These are completely different things. One is about the absence of a person nearby, the other is about the absence of oneself. And I found myself, and that's what matters. Spring had arrived, and the snow in the courtyard was melting away in dark patches. I was coming back from the market with a bag of apples, looked up and saw my reflection in the window, the same face, but with a different look, sober, alive. In the evening, Linda called, brought another casserole and gossip from the building, and we laughed. Then I put my phone on silent, poured myself some tea, and opened a notebook, where I began to write down simple plans, without big words. Sunday, park Wednesday, movie vacation. Colorado. Colorado wasn't about repeating the past, but about choosing my own path. I wasn't waiting for new romances, just as the hungry don't wait for a feast, but for a warm bowl of soup and a place at the table. If someone ever comes along, I won't miss it, but I'm not the type to start something just to fill the silence. I am no longer a thing that fills someone else's emptiness. Before going to bed, I turned off the light and opened the curtain slightly. A dim moon lit up the courtyard, and the snow glowed gray. The kettle was cooling in the kitchen. My warm sweater was lying in the room. I'll put it on in the morning and go to school. The children will need books about wolves, but kind ones, and I, as always, will find the most suitable ones for them. This is life, not a close-up of passions, but small, faithful movements that add up to support. The truth is simple, honest. No one is obliged to love anyone, but everyone is obliged not to lie. Other people's blindness does not make you worse. And if one day you choose yourself, the world, oddly enough, does not become poorer, but clearer. I turned off the water, put the cup in the sink, stroked the table with my palm, and for the first time in a long time, I caught myself waiting for tomorrow not as a test, but as an ordinary day in which there would be enough space for things to do, for silence, and for myself. Thank you for listening to this story to the end. Write in the comments how old you are and where you are from. It is important for us to know who is watching us. Like and subscribe to the channel. There are even more real-life stories ahead.